I'd like to just say, Vicky, that what you just did is inner work, and you were willing to share it with us and trust us with that. Thank you for that. Um, I will be really curious to see what changes in the outer world around you in the situation. Might be subtle, but you've just done inner work on a feeling, on a thing that was going on. And I've come to really live my life and understand that it is true, the ancient words, as within, so without. And sometimes the idea is that I have to do these things outside to make things change. And I find myself constantly being reminded whenever I forget, and I do, go back inside, go back within, ask what it needs. And it's astonishing. You want to talk about miracles, you want to talk about real magic. This is where things really begin to change. And it changes in ways that the mind doesn't understand. There's this linear thing. The mind says, if you do this, then and there's all these strategies, and that's understandable. It's how we were trained. But there's a deeper function of the heart and of the soul, and tapping into that then really does make real visible change in the world around us. And it's astonishing to me. So thank you for being willing to do inner work with us today.
Well, thank you for helping me. I feel so much lighter. Thank you, everybody.
Good. That's wonderful. I want to share something. I know I've talked with Lisa, and see if I'm holding this up right. This book, Belonging, by Toko Pa Turner. She says in Belonging, and this is Remembering Ourselves Home, is the subtitle. Such a beautiful teacher, so gentle and inviting. But in here she says, I believe we have more than enough creativity to solve the problems of our times, but we have to make a perilous trek into the wilderness within us to reclaim it. There is a stand of undeveloped jungle, of a place of indigeneity within each of us that can never be domesticated. It is borderless land, beyond personality and convention, even beyond thought, where pure creativity arises. Like the signature song of a tropical bird, the spiraling of an arbutus tree, the evening scent of a jasmine bush, there is an essence in each of us intended to be expressed. Few make the trek into this creative wild because the path requires great vulnerability. To come into our true originality, we must surrender the layers of numbness we use to protect our hearts. She says, in my practice, I work with many medicine people who have sent their gifts for dreaming, seeing, and creativity into exile. These gifts are often forged in the belly of trauma, then sent into hiding because the world feels too hostile to use them in the open. The problem is that in armoring our sensitivity, we're in danger of numbing the whole spectrum of our feeling, And so we're sitting together today, and we share a common desire for something that's real, for a real life, for expressing that essence of ourselves, And Lisa talked about it a little while ago, about shedding things and imagining a different way of living, and one that is not necessarily in line with many of us. Now, my children were born in 2001. Yeah, and they were born on the wave. And so for them, life feels very fluid. They don't have as many things. I just turned 47, and being born in the 70s, there were lots of different influences about what success meant and what having your shit together as a grown-ass adult would mean, right? I mean, and so letting that change for me has been a very difficult process. And maybe you can relate to that as well. Like Lisa, you were talking about just the belief of what does it mean about a person has a successful business, and they let all these things, maybe an office, go, and they go and live in a tiny house. And what does it mean about a person who makes the radical, crazy, batshit choice to live in joy, I mean, what happens next? Is that person like lost their mind? So I didn't know exactly what would happen today in talking about realigning with purpose, realigning with soul, but it has been perfect so far, and I know it will be continue to be because we're here with our hearts open and we're asking the real questions. What do we truly want? What do we truly desire? You know, and I find it interesting that when we ask that question, when people come to work with me, a lot of times that's the first question I'll ask: what do you truly want? Um, and those of us who were A students, we usually try to answer that question with something really smart. The ones who were, C students are a lot more honest. They're like, I don't fucking know what I want, which is really refreshing. For us A students, it takes a while, and eventually we get around to muttering, yeah, I don't really know. And the reason for that is that the rational mind is so conditioned to have the answer, to know for sure. And like Lisa said earlier, when I asked what the seer energy was wanting to say, and the answer was partly it's a mystery. This part is a mystery. And so stepping into this time that I feel is so ordered in some way, that it's been given to us to create uncertainty, to create not knowing. Earlier this year, I was I marked it in my mind and in my journal and came back to it then a few months later. But an old astrologer friend of mine used to sit with me almost every day by phone, and she would ask me how I felt, and then she would read back the astrology for that day, and compared with my chart, which was absolutely fascinating. I went from astrology skeptic to an astrology, okay, I don't understand how all of this works, but it certainly seems to be true. It certainly reflects, reality in very subtle and interesting ways. But she hammered into my head several years ago, 2020 is going to be a big year. 2020 is going to change everything. And she said, save your money and live a careful lifestyle, because 2020 is going to make you wish you had if you didn't. So here we are. And early in 2020, I was looking, I don't watch the news, but I think some article came up on Facebook or something, and it was talking about the crazy booming economy and everything expanding in every possible direction. And I thought back to Melinda, and I thought, I wonder if 2020, I wonder if she missed it. And then I took a break and went to Mexico with my brother for a week and came back home, and I flew back into Dallas, and I was the only person in the customs line coming home. The only, I mean, literally no one ahead of me. And it felt like a ghost town. It felt like something out of The Walking Dead or something. And as I flew home in that plane, and then and then it really started to hit the States. What was going on prior to that? It was maybe in question. That came back to me. Her prophecy, based on the astrology of this year. So here we are in this really, really extraordinary time. A time of actual change, the opportunity for change. And so we don't get to answer that question, what do I really want, with a glib answer. Well, I want a bigger house, or I want the next promotion, or whatever the normal answers would be to that. I feel like we're being offered this opportunity to open our heart and say, what, remember how I asked you earlier to write something down about what you loved as a child? I would love it if you all would later today write a short or long letter back to that child self, back to that person you met in memory a few minutes ago. I would love for you to tell them about your life now, about the things you've done, what you've created, the things you love now, the things that feel stuck or sad. And maybe in a day or two, you could write back to your older self from your younger self. And I'm not going to tell the younger self what to say, but I feel like your younger self will have some things to say to you if you ask, if you're willing to be with it. Your younger self didn't know all the rules for living, didn't know the rules for success, didn't know how heavy everything gets, how important. I feel like your younger self will be willing to share tremendous wisdom with you because there are three big enemies of the inner self. Kyle, you mentioned the inner self during the meditation this morning. I love that. And I feel very strongly that your inner self is never broken. Your inner self is not damaged. It's not bent or polluted. What happens when we show up here in this world then is usually right away, three things begin to happen. Socialization. So we come in as blank slates-ish. We're learning more about what gets passed down through DNA and things like that. But relatively speaking, from a psychological standpoint, we show up as blank slates. And we only have two fears, by the way. Psychologists and doctors have found that only two hardwired fears. One is a fear of falling, and the other is a fear of loud noises. So as a very primitive creature, those are the only two fears we actually have. Then we begin to learn fear, and quite rightly so. We learn that, a barking dog bites, and we learn not to stick our tongues in the wall sockets, and we learn, all these things. Don't drink the bleach, and don't play in the toilet, and all that. We learn things about life. But what gets lost in the process of socialization, becoming a person, becoming a human, and by the way, we need these things. Socialization isn't an evil. This is how we learn to read, and how we learn to walk and drive a car. All of these things, how we learn to write and sing and all of that. But it sets up this false comparison to other people, which is funny because it's a paradox. Because on one side, we learn by imitation, we learn by comparison. That's how we learn to walk and read and talk. But on the other side of it, then, that also teaches us not to trust the impulses of the inner self, the primitive self, the true self, And so that's the first big enemy of pure expression of the soul, of alignment, is socialization, is learning that we must do it like other people. The second one is fear of rejection or experiences of rejection, because we are such communal creatures that to be part of a tribe is so important to us. And the fear of rejection, especially in our primitive brains somewhere back there, it says that if we are rejected, if we do something that is going to cause rejection, that's life or death. It isn't in our modern world. We know that there's a safety net, but in our primitive, what lives in our primitive brain says if you're rejected, that means you're going to be out there in the wild with the creatures and the elements and no protection, and you will die, right? So that's why it's so powerful for us, this fear of rejection. So those are hand in hand. And the other one is trauma or traumatic experiences. And when you get these three things together, they begin to more and more damage the connection to the inner self, the wise, simple inner self. And I've come to feel very strongly that the inner self has all of the answers. It knows the direction. It can show us where to go. The only thing that needs to be healed is the connection to it. The connection to it. And so by having these experiences of doing a heart meditation this morning together, that's one way of bringing the nervous system down into the green zone again, out of heightened anxiety. And in this green zone, if I could show you this on a graphic, there's a green zone, and then above that is a red zone, and above that's the freeze. Where the arousal of the nervous system, we go up into anxiety, into this parasympathetic nervous system, we go up into anxiety every day. And that's where fight or flight starts to come in. Or another version of that is fawn. So this is where I'm going to do everything for everyone around me. That's how it expressed in my life, was not so much fight or flight. It was more, let me be responsible for everyone around me. That's what would feel safe. And above that is freeze. And that's where disassociation, depression, despair, shutdown, that's where freeze is actually the highest level of that. It's when I can't do anything about my situation. So I'm just going to numb out. So using these tools to come back down into the green zone, meditation, yoga, some of these things can help settle our bodies down. And I know Kristen teaches a lot about nutrition and yoga. Nutrition can help bring the body back down into a space. And in this green zone space, this is where we have social connection, we have compassion, we have curiosity, we feel grounded. This is where everything, this is the basically the holy grail of personal development and spirituality and all of it. And what's interesting is we can go there on purpose. It doesn't require a 7-day silence retreat in Tibet, although that sounds pretty wonderful right now. But just going there for a few minutes with a heart meditation, going there for a half an hour with yoga, even something simple like going outside with bare feet and standing in the grass, or taking a walk. Lisa, you mentioned how much nature is your friend, and it's my friend as well. And so doing these things intentionally can help us tune back in and heal the connection to the inner self, right? So we were talking about, aligning with soul purpose, and I feel like so often that gets complicated. And once again, the adult mind jumps in and says, here's how your life will look if you're living on purpose. And that a lot of times keeps it way out there on the horizon. I wrote a book called The Divine Arsonist, and that was a big deal for me. And I thought, wow, when I finish that book and publish it, I'll know that I'm living my purpose. And so it was a deep work for me to get that done. And then I finished it and published it, and my soul still had purposes. And it had more purposes than writing a book. And then I thought, oh, well, the next book, Blessed Are the Weird, that one will help me feel like I'm living my purpose. And then everything will come together, and then I'll be living on purpose. Things are still feeling pretty dicey in other ways. What has come to me is it's so much simpler than that. If you go back to that child, or even before that child, when you first showed up here as a spark, before that child knew its own name or anything about the world, it feels to me that the purpose was to experience things, and to experience them for the joy of the experience of it, So I've stopped saying living on purpose. I've started saying, I want to live in purpose right now, And so the other day I looked out my back door and I noticed 3 bikes that were stacked against the fence that had been there for a couple of years, and they weren't serving anyone, and my kids didn't want them anymore. And I was feeling like a loser because they were sitting there. And it was just, every time I'd glance at them, there was this little bit of heaviness that would come in. It's like, oh man, you got to get your shit together and clean that up. And so the other day, I got nudged. Why don't you just call your friend who has a truck, and why don't you just go donate the bikes? And so I did, except everything was closed. All the donation places were closed. And so I'm like, well, we have the bikes in the back of the truck. That didn't change, and I'm not taking them home. So my friend said, well, why don't we go to Albertsons and get a poster board and write free bikes on it and take it down by the homeless shelter? And I said, oh, that's a fantastic idea. So we did, and we felt super sketchy about it. And, didn't want to be littering or whatever, but we hung the sign up, and then I drove back an hour later and the bikes were all gone. And it made me feel so happy, that people got these bikes that were doing nothing but turning into rust on my back porch. And then the next day I went to Home Depot and got some pots and some plants and some herbs and dirt. And I'm turning that back porch into a beautiful thing. And it makes my heart so happy to do that. I'm sharing that with you because that's one of my purposes in life, is to create artful places around me, artful experiences. And now I'm seeing it with a shade sail and with the chair. And I'm seeing myself this summer in the early morning out there with a cup of coffee and my journal and doing work under that stage. So can you feel like my younger self got all excited about that, because that's an expression of purpose. That's taking something that I didn't love and turning it into something that I do love, and then learning how to also love all of that. So I wanted to share that with you because I think sometimes the idea of aligning with soul purpose or transformation, these things can get so heavy. they can seem so serious and so hard even, and maybe way out on the horizon. It might be as simple as the closet in your hallway. And what's interesting to me is that by paying attention, it's kind of like you pull any thread, any dangling thread that maybe doesn't feel good, and you pull it and ask, how can I bring joy to this? Joy is such a tremendous compass for purpose. If you ask about that relationship, what would joy do here? And this doesn't always mean something nice. Joy might be really honest and have a hard conversation so it can actually flow, you know. What would joy do here becomes this compass. And it also is the most primitive impulse of the soul, I feel, is the search to express and feel joy. How can I feel joy in this? And by the way, joy to me is so much deeper than, it's so much deeper than happiness. Happiness is kind of like a geyser and it bursts out. And so we say the pursuit of happiness as if that's the thing. To me, joy is like the aquifer that's way under the surface. And if it runs dry, if joy runs dry, then real suffering happens on the land above it. So joy is quiet, joy is deep, joy runs underneath all of the experiences, even depression or the things that are really hard, or, you know, you might find tremendous joy in transforming your body through a practice of yoga and proper nutrition. You might find tremendous joy, even though it's so difficult and you're sweating and you don't want to get out of bed to go do that thing, or you really would rather go get a cheeseburger instead of eat the other thing. But the question becomes, does this bring me joy, though, to craft a life that feels true, to step out of old patterns that are so habitual that I don't know anything different, you know? So I want to maybe wrap this part up by saying that transformation to me has become a threefold thing. First is self-discovery. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I underneath all of these layers of ideas about life? And by the way, your younger self can tell you who you are. The more you go back and ask, before you learn not to make that face or to be too much or to do the things you do, your younger self can begin to remind you this is who you really are. So self-discovery. What do I love? I have a little process on my site that you're welcome to go grab for free, jacobnordby.com. There's a free creative self-journaling practice, and it's about a 10-minute thing a day. And it asks 3 questions, so you don't have to even go get the PDF. I'll just tell you what it is right now. 3 questions. How do I feel? How do I feel? Second question, and by the way, be very basic with that. Like, how do I feel right now in my body? How do I feel? I'll wake up and do this, and a lot of times those feelings I'm having first thing in the morning, those feelings first thing in the morning are not lovely, joyful, 5D, high vibe feelings. Like, well, I feel kind of grouchy, and I'm a little bit nervous about the appointment I have later today. You know, or I feel pissed off that my kids didn't empty the dishwasher last night like I asked them to, or whatever. So how do I feel? How do I feel? I feel tired. I feel hopeful. I feel excited. Whatever is honest. So that's the first question. Then the second question is, what do I need? What do I need right now? Sometimes it's very simple. I need to pee. You know, if we begin to pay attention to the needs of our body, the needs that are coming up right now, like this is what I need. Once again, now we're tuning back in. We're healing that connection to the inner self, because it's so easy to get away from the instinct. I don't think I should be tired right now because it's still the middle of the day and I need to get all this work done. What if we treated ourselves more like we treated a toddler that we really loved? What do you need, honey? I'm tired. I need a nap. Go take a 20-minute nap. For God's sakes, I need a drink, mommy. I'm hungry. You know, what if we treated ourselves with that level of gentleness and care? So the second question, what do I need? And then the third question, what would I love? Now, I've found that if we start with that, if we try to start by manifesting, writing out a vision of what we'd love, without paying attention to the other things first, the inner self knows better. It's like a toddler is like, I remember when I was a kid, my mom would say, you wipe that frown off your face and put your smile back on. I mean, great, but that just taught me how to tell a lie. Like, Here's how to lie. That's not how you're feeling, but I need you to put a face on so I will be happy with you. Here I am at 47, just now learning how to tell the truth to myself again. And it's so wonderful. But so I'm telling you that to say you can't skip the steps. How do I feel? Don't tell a lie there. This is how I feel right now. What do I need? And then what would I love? And this can be big stuff, or it can be simple. And I think sometimes it's most useful to say, how would I love to feel right now? How would I love to feel? So that's the simple journal process. And that is one of the practices of healing the connection to the inner self, to the creative self, to the soul self, to where we can even hear. So this is where we can even hear the voice saying, this is living in your purpose today. This is what I would love today. Because by the way, whatever you can say that you truly love deep down all the way, that is one of your purposes. I truly love to make my backyard beautiful. That's one of my purposes. I truly love the way it feels when my kids come in the house and we make dinner together. I truly love the way that feels. That's one of my purposes, you know? I truly love the way it feels to sit here and look in your eyes and have you share so honestly like you've done with me today. This is one of my life purposes, but it's not the only one. Later today, I'll go out and walk in the foothills and the trails up there, and I love the way my body feels when it's up there. One of my life purposes is to love my life in the body that I have, you know? So transformation, first self-discovery, and the more that we then discover this is who I am, this is what I love, this is what I need, then we begin to accept that self. Hi. Um, this is when we begin to learn, oh, I'm really curious about this creature, this person, this self. And then self-acceptance, self-discovery, and then creative expression, the expression of that true self then becomes as natural as breathing. Earlier in our meditation, Kyle invited us to breathe in and out from our hearts. And the more we heal and strengthen this connection to the inner self, creativity isn't just writing a book or painting a painting or inventing some hot app or dancing or whatever. Creativity is the expression of your true self. It's living in your purpose. It's living in the joy, in the love of being who you really are. And by the way, transformation to me, it is the changing of form, but it's not changing the form into anyone else's image. It's not changing into the best life now guru on Instagram or Facebook. It's changing to become more and more of who you really are. It's the acorn has the code of the full-grown oak in it. The acorn has to break open and fall apart and let life come forward, and then it no longer looks like an acorn, like you said earlier, Kristen. It's changing form completely, and Kyle, you said it too. We're going from one form to another, but you know what? It's not changing its identity. It's becoming more and more and more of who it is. So I just want to leave you with this, that success in life, that purpose in life is only finding out who you really are and becoming more and more and more and more of that in joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I love you.
That was incredible. I don't think you could have defined purpose any better. So beautiful. Thank you, Jacob.
I love you guys. Thanks so much for this opportunity. My day just got a lot better from sitting with you. Bye.